Hi, in this video we will show you what the BrightXpress suite has to offer and its numerous functions. We will be creating a mobile application that can be used to store a contact list locally and send this list back to a database on a SQL server. To do this, we will be using BrightBuilder, a mobile application designer, to create our application. What we also have is a SQL server with a test database, which initially has no tables. Now, if we go back to BrightBuilder and create a project, you will notice that there are two types of projects. The first are BSP projects, which are the mobile application itself. It's where we define all the client-side details like the user interface. The other are BEP projects, which will be covered later in this video. So let's create our application by making a blank BSP project. Now we're going to create all the necessary elements to save and send our contact list from the client to the server. To store the records on the device, we need to create a table. The table subtree houses our table definitions, which are used to store records of data on our device. Here it's so easy to add new columns. Our first column will be our name column, which won't allow nulls and will be our primary key. We'll also have another column for the phone number. And both of these columns will have the string type. Now, the next element we need is queries. Queries use the tables we define in the table subtree in order to create a subset of data or dataset. When you first create a query, it will query for all records in the specified table by default. We can change this by using conditions to specify certain records we want to form the dataset. As we want all records in our table, we aren't going to be using conditions here. Another functionality is we can specify which fields we want as our output. So in this case, we want all of our columns to be part of the output. So we're going to have them all as our output fields. Now, in order to perform synchronization, we need sync rules. Sync rules are used to specify in what direction we want data to flow. Sync rules use queries we define in order to create a dataset that will be sent or received. So let's set it to the query we just created. Now, since we want to send our data to the server, we will set the direction to be from the client to the server. Now we are going to create the user interface for our application through forms. Forms are where we define what we see on the device screen. When you first create a form, you will be prompted to specify a default form size for your project that will be used on forms from now on. You can choose some existing sizes that BrightBuilder has for certain devices, or you can even specify your own width and height. For this project, let's create a form with the size of the iPhone 6 portrait size. Now what we see is a device skin with a blank screen. We can drag and drop form controls onto the form window to create our user interface. Now form controls are used to display data, perform actions, or can be used for decoration. We've just added two edit controls where one will be used to allow users to enter the name of the contact and another to allow users to enter the phone number for that new contact. We'll also be using labels to indicate which edit control is for which data. Now we're also going to be using a list view. A list view can be used to show the contents of a table. All we need to do is set its list query property to the query we just created. So a list view displays the dataset that a query gives it. So in this case, it will show all the records in our table. What we also need are two buttons, where one button will be used to save the record we entered in the edit controls into the table, and another to send the data in our table to the server. Now, to perform this functionality, we're going to need expressions. Expressions are used to perform the mobile logic of our application. So let's create an application called Save Click, which will be used when we want to save a record into the table. We can create an expression by dragging and dropping operations from the bottom toolbar or from objects from the data source tree. What we're going to need are the methods under the database object. So what we're going to do is we're going to call database reset, and we're going to call database.add column. Now we need to set this for our table, and we need to select the column that we're going to add to. What we're also going to need is to get the control, which will house the data for our new name. We also do this for the phone number. So table, select the column, and add the control that has the data that will store the phone number. And now all we do is we add the record to the table that we want. Now that we've added a new record, we're probably going to have to refresh our list view. So that's easy. All we need to go to is the edit control and find the refresh function and drag it to our expression window. So now we've just added a expression that will save the contents of the name field and the phone field into our table and refresh our list view. Now we need to create another expression to run the necessary functions to perform the synchronization to the server. And what we're going to need here are the methods under the synchronizer object. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the sync rules that we defined in order to perform the synchronization. So what we do is we disable all sync rules, then we enable the sync rule, and set it to true. Now what we're also going to want to do is to show the sync dialog box when the synchronization is running. And that's all we have to it. What this will do is it will run our synchronization rule, which will create the dataset that will be sent to the server and actually send it to the server. Now all we need to do is to set the action click property for our buttons to the right expression. So there you have it. Now when a user enters a name and phone number into the edit controls and press save, it will save what we've entered into our table, and it will refresh our list view to display the contents of our table. Now when a user press send, it will perform this synchronization and send our data to the server. Now in order to do this, we also need BP projects. BP projects contain a configuration for a server that tells your BrightServer instance where data sources are to read and write to them. Now, BrightServer is a lightweight, easy to use server solution which allows mobile workers to connect to the backend information while managing the flow of business data in and out of the field. So let's create a blank BP project. Now, from the project tree, you can see we have another table subtree. This is exactly the same as the BSP project. So we can easily copy and paste our table definitions from each project so that the server will have the exact same table definition to store records. The next element are sync points. Sync points define the data flow between different data sources. Here we can graphically lay out the data sources and easily visualize what data is flowing between which source. We can have multiple clients with its client table where data is stored. We can have a file on the server, or we can have a database. Now, for our application, what we're going to do is we're going to synchronize to a database. So all we need to do is select the right server and enter the necessary details in order to connect to your database on your SQL server. Now, all we need to do, click on the client table, press Control, and what we're going to do is indicate that the client will send its data to the server. Now, you're not restricted in any direction that you want data to flow. You can have the database send data to the client, or you could have the client send to multiple databases. You can have any data flow that you want. However, right now our database has no tables. So to remedy this, we can use BrightBuilder to create a table in our database using the table definitions we defined in our project. So what we do is we take the table we want to add to our database and select the database connection that we created in our sync point and create the table. Now, if we go to our SQL server and connect to it, you will see that the database will now have a new table added to it. We can see that this table will have the same columns as our table definitions in our projects and will be empty. So now our SQL server and database are ready for synchronization. Now the next thing we need is to create a BrightServer instance of your server. You can do that by simply going to the Server tab, adding a new server, and entering all the necessary details to connect to your server. In this video, we will be using localhost, which is added by default. Now, in order for mobile users to connect to your server, you will need to add user accounts to your BrightServer instance. This can be found under Configuration and in Users. Now, by default, there is a built-in user, bsadmin, with the password change it. For security reasons, you should probably go ahead and change that password for this default account. We can add new users, change their name, specify their role, and add their password really easily. Now what we're going to do is post our changes to the server. But before doing that, we're going to check if any of the changes we've made will cause any errors, and the result will be shown in the output validation window. As you can see, no errors were found. Now, another nice feature of BrightServer is that we can store our application and server configurations on the server and act like a repository. So we can upload multiple versions of the same application and release these projects to your mobile workers on the field. All they need is an internet connection and they can get access to the application and the necessary server configuration to synchronize data. They don't even need to be connected to a computer to obtain the application. Now, in order to do this, we need to deploy our application and server configuration. So we go to our BSP project, deploy to server, select the server we want to deploy to, and enter a release description. This will assign a version number to the application we just released. So every time you deploy your project, it will add a new version number and will act like a repository. We can use this dialog box to also take us to the users and release our application to some or all of the users. Here we're not restricted in how many users we can deploy our project to. We can release our projects to all the users or we can release to just some. Now let's do the same for our BP project. Deploy to server, select the server, and enter a release description. Now we're going to release the server configuration just like the application. And there you go. We can release specific version numbers to certain users, which allow for some great flexibility. Now we're going to post the changes again, and no errors were found. Now let's go to our mobile device. To run the application, you will need to have the Brightforms app, which is the mobile device engine. This can be downloaded from the App Store for iOS, the Play Store for Android, and the Windows Store for Windows platforms. Now, if we open Brightforms, all you need to do on the device is enter the server IP address, your username and password, and press Activate. This will download the released application to your device. Now let's try our application. Let's put in a name and let's put in a phone number. And press save. As you can see, our list view has been updated with the name and phone number we just entered. Now let's press send and synchronize to our server. What we see right now is the synchronizer dialog box, which shows us the progress of our synchronization. As you can see, we got a successful synchronization message, meaning synchronization worked. Now, if we go to our SQL server and check the contents of our table, you will see that the table in our database now has the record that we just entered on our mobile device, meaning synchronization was successful. How easy was that? If there's anything you want more clarification on, you can find links to information on what we have explained below, and there are other videos which explain more functionality that the BrightXpress suite has to offer. Thank you for watching.